A man in a sharp business suit is flying on a commercial airliner. He sits in the back row, orders a bourbon, and hands a note to the flight attendant. A few hours later, he opens the rear door of the plane in mid-air and jumps into a freezing, pitch-black rainstorm with $200,000 strapped to his chest. Despite the FBI launching the most massive and expensive manhunt in United States history, he is never caught. No body is ever found. He simply vanishes into thin air. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, the man who pulled off the only unsolved skyjacking in aviation history and became the ultimate American ghost. It starts on the eve of Thanksgiving, 1971. Portland International Airport is a sea of people rushing to get home for the holidays, but one man stands out by being completely invisible. He walks up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter with cold, calm precision and buys a one-way ticket to Seattle for $20. He signs the name Dan Cooper. He looks like any other mid-level executive, mid-40s, composed, wearing a dark business suit, a crisp white shirt, and a black clip-on tie. In his hand, he grips a mysterious black attaché case. He boards Flight 305 and heads straight for the back of the plane. He takes seat 18C, a position that gives him a perfect view of every single person in the cabin. As the jet engines begin to whine, Cooper settles in. He clicks open a lighter, ignites a cigarette, and calmly orders a bourbon and soda. When the flight attendant brings the drink, he hands her a $20 bill and tells her, with a faint, polite smile, to keep the change. As the plane roars down the runway and lifts into the gray, rain-soaked Oregon sky, Cooper reaches into his pocket. He hands a folded note to Florence Schaffner, a 23-year-old flight attendant sitting just across from him in a jump seat. Florence is used to lonely businessmen trying to flirt with her. Assuming it's just another phone number she doesn't want, she glances at him and drops the unopened note directly into her purse. The cabin is quiet, but the air suddenly feels freezing. Cooper leans closer, his eyes completely hidden behind large, dark sunglasses. His voice is low, steady, and terrifyingly devoid of emotion.
"Miss,"
he says,
"you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb."
Florence freezes. She reaches into her purse with trembling fingers and unfolds the paper. In neat, handwritten capital letters, the message confirms her worst nightmare. The most polite man on the plane has just become the most dangerous man in the sky. Florence opens the note. It is written in neat, all-capital letters with a felt-tip pen. It says he has a bomb in his briefcase and demands she sit next to him. She sits down. Her heart is pounding. She asks to see it. Cooper slowly clicks the locks of his briefcase open. Inside, Florence sees 8 red cylinders, a massive battery, and a tangle of red and blue wires. It is a massive, explosive device. He closes the briefcase. He doesn't scream. He doesn't take hostages at gunpoint. He is terrifyingly polite. He gives her his demands, $200,000 in $20 bills. That's over $1.4 million today. 4 parachutes and a fuel truck standing by to refuel the plane as soon as they land in Seattle. If the demands are met, the passengers go free. If not, the plane falls out of the sky. Florence takes the note to the cockpit. The pilots immediately contact air traffic control. The FBI is notified. The most bizarre part of this hijacking: the passengers have absolutely no idea it is happening. The pilot gets on the intercom and simply announces that their arrival in Seattle will be delayed due to a minor mechanical difficulty. For 2 hours, the plane circles over the Pacific Ocean while the FBI scrambles to gather $200,000 in cash and find 4 parachutes. Finally, the plane lands in Seattle. Cooper keeps his word. He allows all 36 passengers to walk off the plane. They still think they just had a normal delay. The money and the parachutes are brought on board. The plane is refueled. Only Cooper, the pilots, and 1 flight attendant are left. The FBI surrounds the runway, confident they will catch him when the plane lands at its final destination. But Cooper knows airplanes better than the FBI does, and his escape plan is physically impossible to stop. Cooper orders the pilots to take off and head toward Mexico City, but he gives them a list of incredibly specific, highly technical instructions. He tells them to fly under 10,000 feet, so the cabin doesn't need to be pressurized. He orders them to leave the landing gear down. He demands they lower the wing flaps to 15 degrees, and he tells them to fly at exactly 150 knots, which is barely above the plane's stall speed. The pilots realize something terrifying. Cooper chose this exact flight and this exact airplane for a reason. Flight 305 is a Boeing 727. In 1971, it was the only commercial airliner in the world that had an air stair, a set of passenger stairs that lowered from the belly of the tail, and it was the only plane that could fly slow enough and low enough with those stairs open. He had built the perfect jump platform. Before we continue the story, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's the absolute best way to help us grow and keep bringing you these insane historical thrillers. Done? All right, back to the flight. It is 8 p.m. The plane is struggling to push through a massive, freezing thunderstorm over the rugged, densely forested mountains of Washington state. Outside the windows, it is absolutely pitch black. Because of the raging storm and the altitude, the wind chill is sitting at a lethal -50 degrees Celsius. Dan Cooper turns to the last remaining flight attendant. With the same flat, emotionless voice, he orders her to go to the cockpit and lock the door tightly behind her. She hurries down the long aisle, leaving him completely alone in the empty passenger cabin. At 8:13 p.m., the pilots feel a sudden, violent jolt and notice a sharp drop in cabin air pressure. A warning light begins frantically blinking on the control panel. The rear passenger air stair has just been deployed in mid-air. A freezing hurricane instantly rips into the cabin. The anxious pilots get on the intercom.
Is everything okay back there?
A startlingly calm voice replies,
Everything is fine.
Those are the last words Dan Cooper ever speaks to the world. Standing completely alone in the roaring wind, he tightly ties the heavy bag of $200,000 around his waist. He straps the parachute right over his sharp business suit. Slowly, he walks down the metal stairs of the lowered ramp, descending directly into the screaming darkness of the storm. Without a single second of hesitation, he steps off the edge into the absolute void. Hours later, the plane lands safely in Reno, Nevada. Heavily armed FBI agents storm the cabin. They find 2 empty bourbon glasses, a cheap black clip-on tie left on a seat, and a spare parachute. The plane is completely empty. The next morning, the FBI launches a massive search. Military helicopters scour the dense forests. Thousands of troops march through the mountains. They are looking for a body, a parachute, or a man spending $20 bills. They find absolutely nothing. Years pass. The legend of D.B. Cooper grows. He becomes a folk hero, the man who beat the system and vanished. In 1980, 9 years after the hijacking, a young boy is digging a fire pit on the banks of the Columbia River. He finds 3 bundles of rotting $20 bills, totaling $5,800. The serial numbers perfectly matched the ransom money, but that was it. The rest of the $200,000 was never spent. His parachute was never found. And to this day, despite reviewing over 1,000 suspects, the FBI has never identified who Dan Cooper actually was. Did he survive the jump? Did he freeze to death in the woods? Did he walk away and live out his days in secret? 50 years later, we still don't know. He jumped into the dark and became the greatest phantom in American history. For decades, the FBI chased shadows. The greatest advantage Dan Cooper had wasn't his explosive device or his parachute. It was his face. Because he looked like a perfectly ordinary mid-level executive, the suspect list was virtually endless. The FBI officially reviewed over 1,000 suspects. They interrogated husbands, fathers, and quiet neighbors across the country. Investigators knew they were looking for a very specific type of man, someone who remained terrifyingly polite under pressure, and someone who understood airplanes far better than the authorities did. He knew exactly how the air stair of a Boeing 727 operated in mid-air, meaning he likely had a military or deep aviation background. But the physical evidence was incredibly slim. All they had was a cheap black clip-on tie, 2 empty bourbon glasses, and the $5,800 in rotting $20 bills found in the dirt 9 years later. The rest of the $200,000 never surfaced. The most frustrating truth for the government wasn't just that he pulled off the ultimate escape. It was that the public actually loved him for it. He became a folk hero. To the world, he wasn't a dangerous skyjacker. He was a legend who stepped into a freezing rainstorm and completely outsmarted the system.